Hello and welcome to The Download from Wise Woman and Wordsmith, where insight meets inspiration. A space for creatives, dreamers and visionaries ready to spark new ideas, ignite purpose and reimagine possibilities. Here we share downloads of wisdom, stories and strategies to help you thrive in your creative journey. I'm your host, Jill Marshall. Tune in, connect and let the magic unfold.
Show you tomorrow.
Welcome to The Download, where we explore the mysterious, the magical, and the deeply practical sides of creativity and insight. I'm Jill Marshall, and today we're diving into one of the most intriguing aspects of creative downloads, those times when they seem to predict the future. Those uncanny moments when an idea, a phrase, a vision arrives, and later we realize it was more than inspiration, perhaps even more than déjà vu. It was foresight. Call it intuition, call it subconscious genius, call it a tap on the shoulder from something bigger than us. Whatever it is, these moments happen to creatives, to entrepreneurs, and visionaries more often than we might think. Now, foresight through a download could be as simple as a feeling or sense of urgency. Don't go there, run now, or follow that path. But what about when it's bigger? Maybe something that's not a message just for you, but for many. Let's start off with a few tales of creative prophecy. We've all heard, and I've told you some of them, stories of artists and inventors who had their breakthroughs in dreams or sudden flashes. But what about when those breakthroughs seem to foretell something yet to come? One of the most unsettling examples is Dean Koontz's 1981 novel, The Eyes of Darkness, which describes a virus called Wuhan 400. Now, although it's not a direct match to COVID-19, the eerie similarity between his fictional virus and the real-life pandemic stunned many readers. The film Contagion followed a similar theme, and weirdly the pandemic led to a surge in its success. Why people wanted to watch more of what was actually happening around them, I'm not sure. But as coronavirus began to spread in January 2020, the movie spiked on Google Trends, and by March of that year, Warner Brothers announced that Contagion was behind only Harry Potter as the most in-demand title in its catalogue to view online. There's Ben Elton's Blind Faith, a novel that essentially rewrote 1984 for the modern world, foreseeing a culture obsessed with social media, surveillance, and performative oversharing long before these trends took over our daily lives, if you can remember such a time. I've thought of that book so many times over recent years as the obsession with reality TV and its notional stars, social media and more took over the world and apparently some of our minds. There's a particular scene in the book which has stayed with me forever. The hero, Trafford, is being commanded to share with his confessor, so he has to push his way back through a crowd at the station. The crowd is largely naked, willingly naked, and yet he gets told he's disrespecting somebody's body when he accidentally touches someone. It's a madness we couldn't really have fully imagined would be true when this book came out in 2007. But doesn't it somehow all feel scarily real, or should I say reality, these days? There are others too. Morgan Robertson's 1898 novella, Futility, described an enormous luxury liner, the Titan, that was deemed unsinkable, only for it to strike an iceberg and sink. 13 years later, the real-life Titanic met the same fate under similar circumstances. The Simpsons, pop culture phenomenon that it is, has an uncanny record of predicting real-world events, from Donald Trump's presidency to the Disney-Fox merger, and even the Siegfried and Roy tiger attack. These coincidences have led many to speculate about the subconscious ability of writers to tap into the undercurrents of the future. Then there are the economists and technologists who, long before the public was aware, foresaw major disruptions. For instance, in the 1990s, economist Ravi Batra predicted a financial crisis linked to growing inequality, something that ultimately played out in the 2008 financial collapse. Meanwhile, visionaries like Ray Kurzweil anticipated the rise of artificial intelligence, self-driving cars, and wearable tech long before they became reality. And of course, I've also had my own uncanny experiences with predictive downloads. Honestly, there's barely a gadget that I thought I'd invented from the depths of my own subconscious for the Jane Blonde series that hasn't been actually created by Apple or someone of that nature. Then the swag. So I started seriously writing my swag series in about 2018. It's the ensemble series, gathering together Jane Blonde, Stein of Stein and Frank, Matilda Peppercorn, legend, and Jack of Doghead, along with their new mysterious leader, Gideon Flynn. In the first book, Spook, I wrote about an Olympics event with no spectators, where viewers were only able to watch from a distance, and only the athletes are in attendance. For Jane Blonde fans, it was going to be a great time to see Janie in action again. But I could never have imagined the strange circumstances in which it would actually be the case that the Olympics had to take place in empty stadiums. In the second swag book, School of Ice, the students have to create for themselves a virtual school, an energy school, basically a school with no attendees. Again, this was pre-2020 and what would transpire there. During 2020 and 21, I wrote the third swag book about Big Pharma felling rainforests for their own purposes, featuring Matilda Peppercorn. And then, to round it all up, not just swag, but all the other origin series for the characters, so 19 books in total, I wrote about war. War founded on misinformation. War where the innocent are framed as the perpetrators. War which is nothing to do with the issues it's supposedly about, but is all to do with who has control of the world's resources. War fueled by hatred on social media. Now, at the time, there would have been ongoing trouble in the Middle East, but not what we refer to as war. But then suddenly, a year later, in 2022, Ukraine was invaded. So they seemed like thought-provoking scenarios when I downloaded them. But then things like the COVID-19 pandemic turned them into reality. Empty stadiums, remote learning, wars based on nothing but greed, and a world grappling with the impact of false narratives. So, what is happening here when we receive these predictive downloads? Is it just a heightened subconscious picking up on patterns that we don't consciously notice? Or is it something more mysterious? Science might call it intuition, our brains processing massive amounts of data and making leaps before we're consciously aware. But some, and I'm one of them, believe it's something more, maybe a connection to a collective consciousness or something perhaps even more mystical. However we define it, one thing is clear. Creativity isn't just about making things up. Sometimes it's about receiving what's already true before we know it's true. So, how can we recognize when we're receiving a download that might have deeper meaning? Here are a few ways to tune in. Firstly, notice recurring themes. If an idea, a word, or an image keeps showing up in your mind or your work, pay attention. It may be telling you something. Secondly, journal your downloads. Sometimes we don't see the connections until later. Writing them down can help us track patterns. And I've honestly gone back to notebooks where I realised I'd written something down possibly years ago that suddenly related to the current day circumstances. Thirdly, don't dismiss what seem like random ideas. Your intuition might be working ahead of your logic. If an idea arrives out of nowhere, notice it, thank it, and give it some space. And fourthly, ask yourself, is this for now or later? Sometimes a download isn't for immediate action, but it is planting a seed. And finally, most of all, trust your creative instincts. The more you listen, the more clearly they'll speak. And by the way, if you're currently listening in these troubling times and wondering what final prediction I downloaded in those swag books that seem to predict what happened and is happening now, well, I hope it's good news. In the end, it's not hatred and greed, but love and compassion that wins out. Always. Thanks for tuning in to the Download podcast. Feel free to like, comment and share and all of that good stuff. And for more about my books, coaching and business services, please check out wisewomanandwordsmith.com. Also, I'd love to hear more about your own intuitive hits and downloads. So do find us on Facebook, YouTube and more.